She was just trying to do the right thing. When Sarah saw the tiny, trembling creature on the roadside, her heart broke. It was helpless, abandoned, and desperately in need of love. Without thinking twice, she scooped it up, wrapped it in her coat, and took it home. She whispered softly, "You are safe now." But as days passed, something felt off. The way it moved, the way it looked at her. It was not normal. Then, one night, she woke up to a sound that sent chills down her spine. That was when she realized this was no dog. Sarah had always been the kind of person who could never turn her back on an animal in need. She had grown up surrounded by pets, and to her, they were more than just animals. They were family. So when she spotted a tiny, shivering creature curled up near the roadside on a cold, rainy evening, she did not hesitate. The dim headlights of her car illuminated the small figure, its frail body barely visible against the wet pavement. Her heart ached at the sight. She pulled over immediately, stepping out into the cold wind. The little creature was curled up, trembling violently. It was soaked to the bone, its fur matted and dirty. It looked fragile, helpless, abandoned. Sarah's instincts kicked in. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, carefully kneeling beside it. The moment her fingers brushed against its damp fur, the animal flinched. It was scared, terrified even, but it did not run. Instead, it slowly lifted its head and gazed at her with piercing, golden eyes. There was something unusual about those eyes. They were too intense, too sharp for such a tiny creature. But in that moment, all Sarah could see was a baby in distress. She had no idea that this was the beginning of a mystery that would shake her to her core. Sarah wasted no time. She took off her jacket and carefully wrapped the creature in it, shielding it from the cold. It was so light, almost weightless in her arms. As she held it close, she felt its tiny heart racing against her palm. She whispered softly, trying to comfort it. "It is okay now. You are safe." The creature let out a soft, whimper-like sound, snuggling into the warmth of the jacket. Sarah smiled, relieved that it was responding to her kindness. She had always believed that love and care could heal even the deepest wounds. At that moment, she felt she had done something good, something right. She hurried back to her car, carefully placing the small bundle on the passenger seat. As she drove home, she kept glancing over, making sure it was still breathing. The rain continued to pour outside, but inside the car, there was a quiet sense of comfort. The little one was safe now, or so she thought. When she arrived home, Sarah rushed inside, cradling the creature in her arms. She turned on the heater and gently laid it down on a soft towel. It barely moved, its tiny body still weak from exhaustion. She took a closer look. The animal had soft, thick fur, and its ears were pointed slightly backward. It had an almost fox-like face, but its size and fragile frame reminded her of a puppy. "You must be starving," she murmured, reaching for a small bowl of warm milk. She held it close to its mouth, expecting it to lap it up eagerly. But to her surprise, it did not drink. Instead, it just stared at her. Those golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a strange shiver down her spine. She laughed nervously. "You are a strange little one, are you not?" The creature remained still, watching her. Sarah decided to give it some space. Maybe it was just too weak to eat right now. She set up a cozy little bed in a corner of the room and carefully placed it there. "You rest, okay? Tomorrow, we will figure things out." As she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, she felt a sense of peace. She had done something good today. She had saved a life. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Something is not right." That night, Sarah slept lightly. Every little sound made her stir. Maybe it was because she was worried about the tiny creature, or maybe, just maybe, her instincts were trying to warn her. At around 3 a.m., she was jolted awake by a strange noise. It was not loud, but it was unsettling. A low, almost growl-like hum filled the air, unlike anything she had heard before. It was coming from the corner of the room where the little creature was resting. She sat up, her heart pounding. What was that? Slowly, she reached for her phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim glow illuminated the small bed where she had left the animal. But it was empty. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Where did you go? She scanned the room, her pulse racing. Then she saw it. The creature was not on the bed anymore. It was standing in the middle of the room, its small body unnaturally still. Its golden eyes glowed eerily in the dim light. It was just staring at her. Sarah swallowed hard. Something felt wrong. She tried to reassure herself. Maybe it was just scared. Maybe it was just trying to adjust to its new surroundings. But deep down, she felt something else, an instinctual warning. She cleared her throat, forcing a smile. Hey, little one, come here. The creature did not move. Sarah slowly reached out her hand, expecting it to step forward to nuzzle into her warmth like before. But instead, it did something that made her freeze. It tilted its head in an almost human-like manner and let out a low, guttural sound that was not a whimper. It was something else entirely. Sarah's hand trembled. A cold chill ran down her spine. What had she just brought into her home? Morning came, but Sarah could not shake off the eerie feeling from the night before. She convinced herself she was just overthinking it. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe the creature was simply adjusting to its new home. But as the days passed, the feeling only grew stronger. The creature did not act like a normal puppy. It did not eat the food she gave it. It did not bark. It did not whine. It did not wag its tail. Instead, it just watched her. Every time she entered the room, those golden eyes followed her every move. It never looked afraid. It never looked grateful. It just observed. Sarah tried to ignore it, but she could not shake the uneasiness creeping into her chest. Something was not adding up. And soon, she would discover the truth. A truth more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Sarah had always been a kind-hearted soul, someone who could never turn away from an animal in need. Ever since she was a little girl, she had been rescuing stray cats, injured birds, and even the occasional lost dog. To her, every life mattered, no matter how small. But nothing in her life had prepared her for the night she stumbled upon a creature that would change everything. It was a cold, rainy evening, the kind that sent most people rushing home to the warmth of their living rooms. The roads were slick with water, and the heavy clouds made the already dark night feel even more ominous. Sarah was driving home after a long day at work, her mind occupied with thoughts of dinner and a hot shower. Then, in the dim glow of her headlights, she saw it. At first, she thought it was just a bundle of wet leaves or a fallen branch. But as she got closer, she realized it was something else, something alive. A tiny, trembling figure lay curled up on the side of the road, barely visible against the wet pavement. Sarah's heart clenched. Without hesitation, she pulled over, turning on her hazard lights. The sound of the rain drumming against the roof of her car filled the silence as she opened the door and stepped out. Cold air hit her face, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on the fragile creature lying just a few feet away. It was small, too small to be left alone in the wild. Its fur was soaked, clinging to its frail body, making it look even tinier than it already was. Sarah could see it trembling, its tiny ribs rising and falling rapidly with each shallow breath. It was scared, weak, and completely alone. She crouched down slowly, careful not to startle it. "Hey there, little one," she murmured softly. "It is okay. I am not going to hurt you." The creature did not move. Its body was curled into a tight ball, as if trying to disappear into the ground. Sarah could not even tell if it was a puppy or a different kind of animal. Its small form was barely recognizable in the rain and darkness. She reached out a cautious hand, her fingers brushing against its damp fur. It flinched, but did not run. Instead, it slowly lifted its head and looked at her. That was the moment Sarah felt something deep in her chest. A strange, indescribable feeling. The creature's eyes were unlike anything she had ever seen before. Large, round, and glowing faintly in the dim light. Golden, almost too bright, even in the dark. There was something eerily intelligent about them, something that made Sarah's breath catch for just a second. But the fear and exhaustion in those eyes overpowered any unease she might have felt. Whatever it was, it needed help. "Do not worry," she whispered, pulling off her jacket. "I have got you." Gently, she wrapped the tiny body in the warm fabric, shielding it from the rain. The creature let out a soft, whimper-like sound and pressed its small head against her chest. Sarah felt her heart melt. She stood up carefully, cradling the small bundle in her arms as she hurried back to her car. Once inside, she placed it on the passenger seat, turning up the heater to help warm it up. The creature barely moved, except for the occasional shudder. She glanced over, a small smile forming on her lips. "You are safe now." But she had no idea how wrong she was. As Sarah drove home, she kept glancing at the small figure curled up on the seat beside her. The rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers and the hum of the car's engine filled the silence, but her mind was focused entirely on the fragile life she had just rescued. She tried to guess what kind of animal it was. A fox? No, it was too small for that. Maybe a stray puppy that had been abandoned. That seemed more likely. She reached over briefly, brushing her fingers against its fur again. It was softer than she expected, despite being wet. The creature shifted slightly, but did not wake up. Her house was not far, just a 20-minute drive from where she had found it. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. She grabbed her jacket, carefully lifting the tiny animal into her arms again before stepping out of the car. Inside, the warm air of her home greeted her, a stark contrast to the cold outside. She quickly moved to the living room, setting the creature down on a soft towel. "All right, little one, let us get you cleaned up." She grabbed another towel and gently patted its damp fur, careful not to startle it. As she worked, she finally got a better look at it. It was definitely not a normal puppy. Its fur was thicker than she had expected, a mix of dark and light shades that almost blended together. Its ears were slightly pointed, but its snout was short, almost cat-like. And then there were its eyes, those strange, golden eyes that seemed far too sharp for such a small creature. But Sarah shook off her hesitation. The important thing was that it needed help. She quickly went to the kitchen and poured some warm milk into a small bottle, hoping it would drink. When she returned, she knelt beside the creature, holding the bottle close to its tiny mouth. "Here you go," she whispered. At first, the creature did not respond. It simply stared at her. Then, slowly, it leaned forward and sniffed the bottle. A second later, it latched on, drinking the milk in slow, careful sips. Sarah let out a relieved sigh. "There you go. That is better, right?" For the first time since she had found it, the little creature seemed calm. It nestled deeper into the towel, its body relaxing slightly. Sarah smiled, watching it drink. A sense of warmth spread through her chest. She had done the right thing. She had saved a life tonight. Once the creature finished, she carefully picked it up again, carrying it over to a soft blanket she had laid out in the corner of the room. "You can rest here," she said gently, placing it down. The small animal curled up instantly, its breathing slow and steady. Sarah sat beside it for a few moments, just watching. Something about it still felt unusual, but she pushed the thought aside. It was just a baby, lost and alone. That was all. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, she felt a sense of peace. But as the night deepened and the house grew silent, something stirred in the darkness. The small creature, now warm and dry, slowly lifted its head. Its golden eyes gleamed in the dim light, reflecting something that was not quite natural. It had found a home. But was it really just an abandoned puppy? Or had Sarah invited something else into her life? Something she would soon regret? The days passed in a peaceful rhythm, the world outside seeming unbothered by the unusual presence in the house. In the morning, the sun would pour through the kitchen window, casting golden beams of light on the breakfast table. The coffee machine would hum to life, and the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee would fill the room. But as the days unfolded, it became clear that something was subtly but disturbingly off about the little creature who had been brought into their home. At first, everything had seemed perfectly normal. The animal, a small puppy, had fit in with her expectations. It looked just like any other dog, a mixture of golden fur, soft and fluffy, with the tiniest hint of a whimper that echoed in the night as it made itself comfortable in the corner of her bedroom. She thought it was cute, innocent, and harmless. After all, she had wanted a companion, and here it was. But beneath that soft exterior, there was something she couldn't quite pinpoint, that felt different. She began to notice the strange behaviors almost immediately. It had been 2 days since the puppy had arrived. She had placed a bowl of dog food on the floor, expecting the usual excited scramble, as puppies tend to devour their meals. But instead of the joyful eagerness she had anticipated, the puppy merely stared at the food. Its eyes were unblinking, fixed on the bowl with an intensity that made her uneasy. "Go ahead," she coaxed, crouching beside the dish. "Eat. It's good for you." The little animal tilted its head, its eyes narrowing as it continued to study her. It didn't bark. It didn't wag its tail. There was nothing playful or excited in its demeanor. She thought maybe it was just shy, or perhaps adjusting to the new environment. But something deep in her gut told her that it was more than that. The puppy still hadn't touched the food. It was as if it had been given a task to observe, and it wasn't going to let anything distract it from that. She shook off the thought, chalking it up to overactive imagination. But when she reached to pet it, the puppy snapped its head toward her hand, its eyes wide with a piercing gaze. A shiver ran down her spine. It was too quick, too precise. That night, she tried again. After a long day, she felt herself unwinding in front of the TV, the puppy curled at her feet. She placed another bowl of food beside it. This time, she made sure to give it a little encouragement, maybe even a treat to tempt it. The puppy turned its head slowly, its eyes meeting hers. "No appetite?" she asked softly. The puppy made a low, almost rumbling sound in its throat. It wasn't a bark, far from it. It was a noise that made her skin prickle. It wasn't quite a growl nor a whine, but something altogether different. Something strange. She watched it more closely as it remained still, its ears slightly tilted back, as if it was waiting. She placed a hand gently on the puppy's head, but its eyes never left her. In that moment, she could have sworn the little creature was studying her with the awareness of something much older than its apparent age. There was intelligence behind those eyes, something unsettling, as if it could see through her. Read her thoughts, perhaps. She pulled her hand back. The puppy let out a soft, almost contented sound, its gaze unwavering, yet its body remained completely still. Days passed, and the odd behaviors continued. Each time she tried to feed it, the puppy either ignored the food or looked at her in that unsettling way. She had even tried changing the type of food, bringing in treats and fresh meat, hoping something would spark a response. Nothing. It was becoming increasingly clear that this puppy wasn't behaving like any dog she had ever known. The strange noises continued as well. Each night, when the house was quiet and the moon cast long shadows over the floors, she would hear faint, almost inaudible whimpers coming from the corner of her room where the puppy lay. The sounds were high-pitched, unlike the normal puppy noises she had expected, almost as if it were mimicking the sound of a creature that wasn't a dog at all. Then there were the eyes. The little puppy's eyes were impossibly sharp. At first, she had thought it was just the way light reflected off its pupils. But no matter where she stood, no matter the lighting, those eyes followed her. They seemed to track her movements like a predator, patient and intent. She had caught it more than once, staring at her from the darkest corner of the room, unmoving, just watching. That was when the dreams started. In her sleep, she would find herself walking down a long hallway. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. She could hear the soft padding of feet behind her, too soft, too deliberate to be her own. She would turn around, and there it was, the puppy, standing perfectly still, its eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, its gaze unwavering. The dreams left her feeling disoriented when she woke, the images haunting her throughout the day. She didn't know why, but her instincts told her that the puppy was connected to them, that whatever it was, whatever it wanted, it was far more than just an ordinary animal. It wasn't just her dog, it was something else. One evening, she found herself standing at the kitchen counter, preparing dinner, when the puppy's strange behavior escalated. It had been pacing restlessly, its tail stiff and unbending. Its gaze never wavered from her as it followed her movements, step by step. The tension in the air was palpable, as if something was building up, waiting to happen. She leaned down to place the last ingredient in the stew, when, suddenly, the puppy let out a sound, more like a low, guttural hum than a bark. It wasn't a sound she had ever heard a dog make, and it made her heart race. She froze, her hand hovering above the counter, as the strange noise reverberated in the air. Without warning, the puppy lunged forward, quickly, too quickly, and snapped at the air near her face. She jumped back, her heart thundering in her chest. The puppy's eyes were wide, as if something primal had taken over. She stumbled back, a chill creeping over her skin. "What the hell?" she whispered to herself, eyes wide with shock. For the first time, she felt truly afraid of the creature. It wasn't acting like a pet. It was something else entirely, something far more intelligent, more calculating. The air felt thick with a strange energy, an energy she couldn't place. As the puppy retreated into its corner, its eyes never left her. It was studying her, analyzing her in a way no animal should be able to do. For the next few days, she avoided looking directly at it, but the puppy, it seemed, was relentless. It would follow her around the house, keeping its distance, yet always observing her with that unsettling gaze. Every time she looked at it, the same feeling settled in her stomach. A growing unease, a sense of being watched, studied, even judged. She couldn't explain why, but something about the puppy, its eyes, its behaviors, began to feel like a warning. A warning that something was coming, something she wasn't ready for. And the worst part? She had no idea how to stop it. The days blurred together, the unease growing with each passing hour. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far beyond the strange behavior of the little creature she had brought into her home. Her thoughts were consumed by the nagging questions. Why won't it eat? Why does it behave like this? Every night, she'd lie awake, listening to the soft, strange noises the puppy made in the dark. The piercing eyes never left her, always watching, always calculating. She couldn't explain it, but deep down, she knew the puppy wasn't what it seemed. She had to know the truth. That's when she made the decision. She couldn't live in fear any longer, couldn't let this strange little creature continue to unsettle her life. She needed answers, answers that only a professional could provide. The following morning, Sarah bundled the puppy into her car, its little body stiff with tension as it sat on her lap. The drive to the vet felt long, as if time had slowed. She could feel the puppy's eyes on her, unblinking, even as she tried to focus on the road. The gentle hum of the engine did nothing to ease the dread that weighed heavy in the air. Arriving at the veterinary clinic, Sarah stepped out of the car, the puppy following her every move. The door jingled as they entered, and she was greeted by the usual warm smile of the receptionist. She could tell that the staff here was used to dealing with animals of all kinds, but when she placed the puppy onto the examination table, something in the air shifted. The vet, Dr. Warren, was a calm, middle-aged man with greying hair and kind eyes. He had been treating animals for years, so nothing about the puppy should have unsettled him. At first, he greeted Sarah with a friendly smile, but as he examined the puppy, his expression slowly began to change. The little creature sat still, unnervingly quiet, as the vet checked its ears, paws, and teeth. He seemed thorough, yet Sarah couldn't help but notice the slight unease creeping into his movements. "Everything seems fine, Doctor," Warren murmured, though his eyes narrowed as he continued his inspection. "A bit of an unusual temperament, but that's not too concerning. Some dogs are just different." Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "But it's not eating," she said, her voice tight with worry. "It's acting strange. And those eyes?" She trailed off, not quite knowing how to explain the growing dread she felt every time she looked at the puppy. Dr. Warren glanced up at her, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Concern, confusion, and maybe something more. He reached down to gently lift the puppy's head, inspecting its gaze with furrowed brows. "Where did you find this animal?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Sarah froze. The question came out of nowhere, and the tone in Dr. Warren's voice caught her off guard. I found it outside a few days ago," she said, her words stumbling. "It looked like a stray, so I brought it home. It didn't seem to have any tags or markings." Dr. Warren's face went pale, and his hand shook slightly as he set the puppy back on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A thick silence filled the room. Sarah could feel her anxiety growing as she waited for Dr. Warren to explain. He stepped back from the table and placed his hands on his hips, his eyes darting between the puppy and Sarah. Then he took a deep breath, and with a grave expression, he said, "Sarah, this isn't a dog." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean it's not a dog?" she asked, her voice shaky. Dr. Warren looked at her, his gaze intense. "This is not a domesticated animal. It's a wild predator, and it should never have been kept as a pet." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean by predator?" she asked, her mind racing to process the implications of his words. Dr. Warren ran a hand through his hair, visibly troubled. "What you're looking at here is a species that was thought to be extinct. It's a rare, dangerous creature, and from what I'm seeing, this one is far too young to have been out in the wild for long. It must have been taken from its natural habitat." A sickening chill washed over Sarah, and she took a step back, her hands trembling. "But it's just a puppy, right? It can't be dangerous. It's just different." Dr. Warren shook his head slowly. "No, Sarah. It may look like a puppy, but that's not what it is. I've seen these before, briefly, in rare reports, but never in person. This animal is part of a species known for its intelligence and predatory nature. It's not a dog, not even close. I can't say exactly what it is, but whatever it is, it's dangerous." Her mind reeled. She was speechless, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. "But what does that mean for the puppy? I mean, it's so small. It doesn't seem dangerous." Dr. Warren took another cautious step toward the table, eyeing the animal with suspicion. "That's what makes it so dangerous," he explained, his voice low. "When it's small, you think it's harmless. But this species, it grows quickly, and it has an instinct for survival. As it matures, its true nature will come out. You're seeing the calm before the storm. It's likely that the puppy you have here will soon start exhibiting more aggressive behavior. It won't be long before its instincts kick in, and it becomes too much to handle." Sarah felt like the world was spinning beneath her feet. She couldn't breathe. "So, what do I do now? Should I give it back to the wild? I can't just let it go." Dr. Warren looked at her with sympathy. "I'm afraid it's too late for that. The animal's instincts will be far too developed for that to work. This creature is meant to live in the wild. It shouldn't have been kept as a pet, and keeping it longer will only put you and others at risk. You need to get it to a sanctuary that specializes in these types of creatures, one where they can safely study it and hopefully contain it. Otherwise, it could get dangerous. The words hit Sarah like a blow to the chest. Everything she had believed about this innocent-looking creature was falling apart. It was not a dog, not a harmless pet, but a predator, one she could not control, and one she was now responsible for. The realization settled in like a weight she couldn't shake. As Sarah looked down at the puppy, its eyes still locked onto hers, she felt a deep sense of dread. She had unknowingly invited danger into her life, and now she had to figure out how to live with the consequences. Imagine for a moment. You bring a seemingly innocent little creature into your home, thinking it's just a harmless animal in need of a good home. At first, it's quiet, almost cute, and you think nothing of it. But as the days go by, things begin to change. The behavior, the eyes, the strange sounds. It becomes clear that you've made a grave mistake. What would you do if you unknowingly brought a wild animal into your home? A creature so dangerous, so intelligent, that it hides its true nature until it's almost too late to act. What if you realized this creature wasn't a dog after all? That the animal you thought you had brought into your life as a harmless companion was, in reality, a wild predator? And what if its true nature began to reveal itself piece by piece until there was no turning back? Would you try to save it, or would you realize it was too dangerous to keep around? What would you do if you were Sarah? Would you try to understand this creature, to care for it, despite the growing danger? Or would you be forced to make a heartbreaking decision and try to send it back into the wild, knowing full well that it's not just a dog, it's something far more terrifying? In this situation, who can you trust? The professionals around you may not have all the answers, and every decision you make could lead you down a darker path. You might think you're rescuing an animal, but what if instead you're unleashing a danger you can't contain? The question remains, what would you do in Sarah's shoes? You've grown attached to the animal, but deep down, you know its true nature is far beyond your control. You've seen the signs, you've heard the strange sounds, you've felt its eyes on you, always watching, always waiting. And now you're faced with a choice. Do you face the truth and try to find a way to safely release it? Or do you allow yourself to believe that it's just an innocent animal in need of love, despite the mounting evidence to the contrary? This isn't just about saving a puppy. It's about survival. And once you know the truth, there's no going back. What would you do when the line between a domesticated pet and a dangerous predator blurs right before your eyes? Tell us, what would you do? If this was your reality, would you choose to keep the anima,